Avoid these 25 common mistakes in Photoshop, Part 1. Welcome to this lecture where we'll explore some of the do's and don'ts in Photoshop. Some of these are straight-out mistakes, while others are personal preferences based on my many years of working in Photoshop. By being aware of this list, you're setting yourself up for success right from the start. That's why I included it so early in the course. Let's get to it. 1. Not saving your project. You create a new document and you get to work. You spend 10, 20, 30 minutes, yet your project is still called untitled, meaning it's not saved somewhere on your drive. If your power goes out or your system freezes, guess who's going to curse the computer gods? My advice to you is to create one layer, then immediately save your project. 2. Using Show Transform controls. This is an option beginners love to use. You can find it here in this top panel, and its role is to show you this rectangle through which you can resize your layer. Most people use it to see what they're working on, but my advice is to gaze at the Layers panel occasionally and cut any distractions from the canvas. Usually in web design, you have to focus 100% on your layer and your layer's edge, not on any additional fluff. Plus, to resize it, just use Ctrl-T. 3. Working on a single layer. This happens mostly to people who like to draw. If you're using one or only a few layers in Photoshop, you're not taking full advantage of the program. It also makes your mistakes much more expensive, since they will most likely affect your entire composition. Be smart. Use multiple layers. 4. Selecting the entire canvas by mistake. You want to increase your speed, but you press on the wrong keys. By being zoomed in, you're not seeing the edge of the canvas and you don't realize you've made a selection. That doesn't sound so bad until you realize that most actions you'll make won't give you the expected result. My advice is to check your canvas edges for these marching ants. That's what they're called in the industry. And if you see them, hit Ctrl-D. Now Photoshop will behave normally. 5. Not understanding pop-ups. When you open up a window in Photoshop, say this one, you can use none of the tools from this left panel until you close it. Same goes here. You may move this window to the side and think, hey, let me change the opacity. Guess what? You can't do it until you close this pop-up. 6. Using auto-select is another thing beginners love to do. You enable it from this top panel, and by checking it, you can select any layer right from the canvas by simply clicking it. It sounds like a time saver, but believe me, it only makes things worse. My advice is to hold down the Control key whilst on the Move tool and click on the canvas. This achieves the same thing. You select that layer without going to the Layers panel. 7. Detaching tabs is very popular among Mac users. Let me show you what happens when you float your tabs. Let's say you put two projects side by side, like so. Now, when you want to check your Layers panel, you always have to double-check which project you're on. As you can see, as I go between them, my Layers panel changes. This can bring you a lot of trouble, so my advice is to always use this normal tabbed approach. If you detach any project, just go to Window, Arrange, Consolidate all to tabs. Now everything is fine, and if you have several projects opened, you can simply click and drag to reposition their order. Good stuff. 8. Not using the right performance settings. Considering we're talking from a web design point of view, I recommend you do this. First, open up Photoshop Settings with Ctrl-K and look for Performance. You can go to Edit, Preferences, Performance. From here, I recommend you do the following. Set your RAM to 70 to 80%. Regarding history and cache, our ideal settings are tall and thin due to our high number of layers in web design projects. In CC 2015.5, this has been renamed to Web and UI. 20 to 30 history states are enough because it's unlikely we'll need more. If you want to increase that number, it may require more juice from your computer. 9. Not understanding scratch disks. Briefly, when Photoshop runs out of RAM, it then uses free space on your drive to hold information temporarily. That drive is called a scratch disk. This affects Photoshop's performance quite a lot, so here's my advice. If possible, use an SSD for your primary scratch disk instead of a hard drive. To set that up, just go to Preferences with Ctrl-K and select Scratch Disks. From here, you can check which drives may be used as scratch disks, and you can change their order by selecting them and using these two arrows here. Besides getting more RAM, this is probably one of the best things you can do. If you have no solid-state drive, SSD, it's best to use a partition with enough free space on it. I'd say at least 20 to 30 gigabytes, but also one that doesn't have your operating system installed on it. Going back to SSDs, they are much faster than normal hard drives, so if you have one and you're using it to boot up your operating system, that should be fine. One thing to know is that SSD performance goes down the fuller it is. So if you only have 10 to 20 gigabytes of free space on your SSD, that will slow down your computer a lot. 10. Using weird characters in your project names is another mistake many people make. It's not always a tragedy, but it may cost you your file. So when you want to save your PSD, you'll go to File, Save As. In this new window, your file type should be .psd. Now, regarding your file name, it's best you not use some of these symbols. That's bad practice and you're looking for trouble. Even full stops or periods aren't a great idea, as this might change your file's extension. 11. Using inappropriate units of measurement. I've already mentioned this, but it seems to be an epidemic, especially when it comes to your fonts. Because we're on the web, use pixels. That's the standard unit of measurement. Some people use points, but those are best used for printing. My advice, stick with pixels everywhere. 12. Moving layers with arrow keys. Say we want to move this object more to the right. We get our Move tool, and then what? Well, normal designers simply drag the layer to where they want to move it to. Quirky people do this. They hold down the right arrow key and they move it pixel by pixel. By pixel by pixel. Sound fun? Not really. Some may add shift into the mix and that moves the layer in increments of 10 pixels, but even that's tedious. My advice? Just drag it into place. Okay, that's it for this lecture. Let's continue the list in the next video. If you have questions, just let me know in the comments area. If you don't agree with some of these, that's perfectly fine. Photoshop gives you lots of ways of achieving the same result. How you want to get there is your choice. Okay, let's continue.